We have increasing import dependencies from China, and this is putting a heavy burden on companies all across the globe. It needs to be dealt with as well on the highest political level. China almost has a monopoly on the processing of critical raw materials. What Europe urgently needs to do is to really ramp up the resilience of its global supply chains.
Germany and the U.S. are each in urgent talks with China over the squeeze on so-called rare earth mineral exports, which is threatening to bring some industrial production in those countries, as well as others, to a standstill. Stefan Steinicke with the Federation of German Industries, also known as BDI, joins me now for more. Stefan, thanks for joining us. We want to get into the details in just a moment, but maybe you can help us understand up front just how urgent this current situation is for German businesses.
Thanks for having me. Well, for German business, this situation is quite challenging. To put it bluntly, the time window for avoiding significant damage in German industry is rapidly closing.
All right, let's go into this further. What are these minerals and why are they so important for viewers who may not understand?
So rare earth elements are highly important for our digital transformation. Think about semiconductors. They are important for our green transition. Think about energy, and they are also important for defense purposes. And today, China is not only the largest producer of rare earth elements, but also of rare earth magnets. 93% of all magnets globally produced are coming from China. So we have increasing import dependencies from China. And the moment that China now introduced these new export control measures, exports from China reduced significantly, and this is putting a heavy burden on companies all across the globe, but also across Germany.
All right, so you mentioned there climate industry, climate manufacturing, the auto industry, even defense, reliant on these minerals and the magnets that they help comprise. Are there alternatives to these minerals?
Today, on an industrial scale, there are no alternatives to these materials. And that's why it is so important to have serious discussions between the European Commission and Chinese counterparts on how to limit the damage that has already been done and how this situation can be eased.
Stefan, help us understand what exactly is happening. You've already referenced these export restrictions from China. Is this a formal ban, or is it a sort of a slow process? How should we look at this and understand it?
So in order to understand it, I think it is important to keep in mind why this happened in the first place. It seems that it was a direct reaction from China on the announcements made by US President Trump on so-called Liberation Day. So China, right after the announcements from President Trump, announced the installation of a new export licensing system without any warning time for European companies, for European governments. It instructed this new export licensing system immediately, and this resulted in the following situation. No more rare earth elements and products incorporating these elements like the magnets were allowed to leave China. In order to make sure that this new licensing system can be put in place in the first place, what we now see is that we have a huge amount of new licenses that have been applied to, but it seems that the Chinese authorities are not able to keep up with the huge amount of licenses that have been applied to. So we have a backlog in the Chinese ports, and this immediately affects global supply chains. What we see, if we look at Germany, there are some companies that are already almost running out of reserves of their metals and materials. There are others that have already been running out of their materials. So we see a reduction of production in first cases, and this time window to avoid further damage is rapidly closing. If not a solution is be found in the next couple of days, we will see additional production reductions.
I want to come back to that in just a moment. But first of all, when we look at the origin of this problem, you mentioned that it appears to be political and trade related, coming as a response or directly after those reciprocal tariffs from the U.S. were announced. Do we have an understanding of whether any solution is going to be mostly political with China, or is there some way to have them speed up the process? Is there also a kind of bureaucratic solution to it, or is this going to be primarily political?
I think it is both. If China wants to, it could easily offer a European-wide license for companies that apply to export these materials to Europe. But obviously, it is also a political question, and therefore it needs to be dealt with as well on the highest political level. It has to be dealt with immediately for German companies not to remain in the crosshairs of global trade and geopolitical power conflicts.
This will most likely not be an easy political solution, since Europe also faces pressure from the U.S. to control exports going to China. Is that the situation we're looking at? Is that this is a very sticky, messy three-way kind of discussion about trade and politics and the position of Europe towards China?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is a huge challenge. It's a challenge that won't be solved easily. We have the US, we have China, we have Europe. We have an increasing geopoliticization of global trade in general and of global raw material supply chains in particular. And this is a challenge that won't be easily be solved, and B, go away. And in this kind of situation, what Europe urgently needs to do is to really ramp up the resilience of its global supply chains.
Stefan, who is stopping production right now when we look at German industry, and how bad is it going to get?
So the sectors mostly affected are automotive, the energy sector, machinery, defense, medical productions. And these are the sectors that are already today signaling that they are running low on inventory and are anticipating further production reductions.
Is there a kind of timeline in terms of the amount of stock in these materials that we already have in Europe, for example? When do those look like they could run out or reach a critical level for companies?
So this is really confidential information by the companies that is not shared. But as I said, the window to solve this issue is rapidly closing. And from a German industry perspective, the question of reliability of trade partners is of increasing concern. And in the case that no solution is to be found in the next couple of days, the German industry needs to really think about readjusting its global supply chains and look for other more reliable trade partners with regard to critical raw materials.
When we talk about these raw materials, is it just that China has the cheapest? They obviously have the most, but do they also just have the cheapest? Is it not possible to find other solutions that are going to be more expensive, and obviously that will carry its own consequences?
Yeah, so China holds a vast amount of reserves of certain critical raw materials, but definitely not of all raw materials. But China almost has a monopoly on the processing of critical raw materials. But this, at the same time, gives us in Europe and in other parts of the world also a huge lever of reducing import dependencies from China, namely by ramping up processing production facilities also in Europe. And to put it bluntly, raw materials made in Europe are the ultimate reinsurance policy against geopolitically motivated export stops.
Alternatively, could we see more German companies try and produce in China and then export finished products out of that country?
Yeah, these are discussions that are taking place not only in Germany but also in the US, as I saw yesterday. At the end of the day, it is always a question of how and where you position yourself in global value and supply chains. Um, it might be one part of the answer of relocating certain parts closer to where the raw materials are processed. But as I said, the ultimate reinsurance policy and the most resilient supply chains are those that start with the critical raw materials production here in Germany or in Europe. And we have some capability here to do this on our soil too.
We know the EU has been talking about this for years, that it passed the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, several years ago, and that one of its goals is for 2030 that no more than 65% of EU consumption of these materials should come from a single third country. Is that timeline realistic?
This timeline is a rather optimistic one, and it's a challenging one to reach these targets. But I think these targets are a good way to start and give us a North Star of where we want to head to. It is a first step, and it is good that the first strategic projects in Europe have been decided upon, and now it's up to us to really bring these additional sources online in order to enhance our own security of supply.
All right. That's Stefan Steinicke with the Federation of German Industries. Stefan, thank you so much.